Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. I want to talk about something pretty serious today, and depending on how long this video goes, I may have to break it up into two parts. But I think it's important as we go forward and as we build up to the election that's coming up, that we look at the Second Amendment, we look at where the Supreme Court is likely to go with this in the next term, and hope and pray that we get a president who will go along with the Supreme Court that's in power now. We're going to have to look at some limitations, some restrictions on the Second Amendment. We are not going to get what the purist Second Amendment folks really think we should have. And I'm not denigrating these people. They have very firm convictions in what they believe, but they think the Second Amendment should mean no limitations on what they can possess. Some think that the National Firearms Act of '34 should be done away with completely, that there should be unrestricted possession of full auto weapons, machine guns, sound suppressors, sawed-off shotguns, sawed-off rifles. And in only a handful of states, these things are actually prohibited. And of course, here in Illinois, the People's Republic, they're all restricted. They're all completely prohibited. But in most states, you can have automatic weapons. You can have sound suppressors. You can have sawed-off weapons. If they are registered, if you pay a $200 tax stamp, if you jump through all the hoops. But there are those who say that should be completely unrestricted and you should be able to have whatever you want. I think the Supreme Court has already danced around this issue to some extent, and I don't think they're going to come down on that side. Sound suppressors? Probably. I think those will eventually be opened up, and probably even in states like Illinois where people don't want them to have it. And it dates back to '34. '34 was the first of our gang eras in this country. You know, the Tommy gun, the silencers were attributed to violent criminal gangs, when in reality sound suppressors everywhere else in the world are considered to be mufflers that, you know, tone down the sound. You know, I hunted in Scotland a few years ago, borrowed a weapon instead of taking my own, and it was outfitted with a sound suppressor. The rifle was. And, you know, the ghillie who I was out with, he said, you know, jumping through the hoops to get gun ownership in Scotland is a trick. But once you've got the rifle, you can go down to the hardware store, the ironmonger, as they call them, and you can buy a suppressor over the counter. It's no big deal. So I think, you know, looking at it as a safety device to help our hearing, yeah, we're probably going to get that. Those same people think that we should have unlimited open carry anywhere we want. And there are some of us who think open carry is fine in the right places. I open carried most of my adult life as a police officer, either in uniform or plain clothes. Now, in plain clothes, when you open carried, typically you had a pistol on your belt, but you had a badge on your belt right next to it to kind of, you know, show people that, yeah, I got a gun, but I'm a good guy. But they think it's okay to go to public rallies with an AR-15 or an SKS or an AK-47 slung on your shoulder. And in some states that's legal. And if that's legal and you feel you need to do that, then I guess you can do that. I don't think it forwards the cause of the Second Amendment. I think in some ways it sets us back, because the vast majority of people are ignorant of the Second Amendment. They are not comfortable around guns, and making them uncomfortable with openly carried weapons doesn't improve things. That's my opinion. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it or that you shouldn't be able to do it. I'm just saying I don't think it's a great idea. And I know a lot of people who agree with me. But by tradition, there have always been restrictions on who could or should possess a firearm in the United States. And I think we not only are going to see these things continue, I think we need to see some of them continue for the good of the country and for the good of our movement of having Second Amendment rights. By legal tradition, felons, I'm not sure when this law went into effect, but felons have been restricted to owning or possessing firearms. There have been a couple of federal district court cases, and I believe there's been at least one appellate court case, which has started to walk that back a little bit and say, you know, maybe it shouldn't be all felons that are restricted from having firearms. Maybe just dangerous felons, people who have committed a dangerous felony. Here's my felon story. A very good friend of mine in Wyoming. He discovered later in life that one of his youthful indiscretions of using marijuana, it got him arrested one time in South Dakota. And he was not too long out of high school, and he and a couple of buddies pooled their money, and he went in to buy some grass, buy some weed for him to smoke. And unbeknownst to him, he ended up buying from a confidential informant for the police and was arrested. Well, later on in life, he pled guilty to that and took whatever punishment went along with it. He had a public defender, and he was told that it was a minor offense, that it would go on his record as a misdemeanor, and it would not cause him any problems later in life. Well, then Wyoming passed an easy-to-get concealed carry law. They always had a concealed carry law while I worked out there. It was done at the county level. A permit could be issued by a sheriff, but virtually no sheriff in the state would issue them, or maybe they would just issue a couple to their buddies, or that kind of system. But when they got a shall issue system, my friend applied for a concealed carry permit, and in the background process he found out that his marijuana arrest in South Dakota had not been recorded as a misdemeanor, but instead had been recorded as a felony. Apparently he didn't have the brightest public defender, and he didn't realize that when he was arrested, my friend made the statement of, oh, I'm just, we pooled our money and I'm buying for my friends. That got recorded as possession with the intent to deliver, because he was going to spread this out to his buddies. A felony. So he lost his gun rights. He was denied the concealed carry permit. In talking with legal counsel, they said, well, you could apply to the governor of South Dakota to be pardoned from that conviction, and that would restore your gun rights. So he filed a pardon request with the governor of South Dakota, and he contacted me and he asked me if I would be willing to write a letter in support of him, and I did. Now, when I first met this guy, I was a new police chief in a small community in Wyoming, and he was on the town council. He was a member of the town council. He was a truck driver. He hauled cattle around the country in semis. He was also a volunteer EMT in the local fire department, so he ran ambulance calls. Both he and his wife did that. And I never knew this guy to be anything but a honest, well-respected member of the community. We became very good friends. We became hunting partners, and still are. So I wrote a letter to the governor of South Dakota, and I said, I didn't know anything about this guy in his youth, but I've known him for more than 10 years as an adult, and I can tell you that both my professional and personal respect for this guy is boundless. I know the things he's done for his community, serving on the town council, serving as an emergency medical technician, and he's just a great stand-up guy. Well, he got that pardon. His gun rights were restored. That's the way the system was supposed to work. Now, it's very possible we will see in the next few years, the Supreme Court might say he didn't need to get that pardon. It was not a dangerous felony. He was not a dangerous person. He should not have lost his gun rights. So we may see that right come back, and I think that would be great. I knew another guy in my hometown. He was he made rifle and shotgun stocks. Pretty good at it. He was not really a gunsmith, but of course he had to have guns to fit them to the stocks. He got drunk at a party one night. He got stopped by the police for a DUI. He was arrested, and in the process he got kind of stupid, and a fight ensued, and he punched the cop. That's aggravated battery. He was convicted of a felony. He lost his gun rights. He attempted to sue, which even today I don't think would stand up, because the courts are going to consider that to be a dangerous felony. So he lost his livelihood because of his actions. Well, don't get drunk, don't get stupid, don't punch a cop. There are lines that I think if you step over, maybe you're going to find that you're going to lose your gun rights. And I think if we're going to keep the right people in our communities from having guns, who should not have guns, we're going to have to live with some of those restrictions. Now, we mostly agree in this country that unstable mental conditions should also keep people out of the realm of firearm possession. Now, this has been part of the FBI NICS system, the National Instant Criminal Background System. It's been part of that since its inception. But we know that getting mental health data fed into that system is very incomplete. It's very different from one state to another. And I think that is inherent in the whole mental health system that we have in this country right now. Now, I want to tell you my little version of the background of what we saw happen in the mental health community in the last 40, 45, 50 years. And why I think it has become a failure in terms of the Second Amendment. And this is my opinion. This is not necessarily based in science, so you blast me as you see fit. I think the mental health restriction part of the Second Amendment prohibition against ownership and possession of weapons, I think it's a victim of liberal bias, and it is indicative of how we've seen our society evolve with the liberals getting their way for far too many years. And really, we're past liberalism now. I think we're on the verge of communism. We'll find out in about 4 weeks after the election. But a few decades ago, the system of mostly state-operated mental health treatment facilities came under attack by these liberals. And it came under attack by the mental health professionals themselves. And while I have had some friends who are part of that system, counselors and such, in my experience, those people who work in that system are very liberal themselves, almost excessively so. And, when you deal with crazy people all the time, it probably helps to be just a little bit crazy yourself. And I've met a lot of those people that I think fit into that category. So these mental health professionals, they went kind of to war against the facilities where they worked. And they said, gee, these are just warehouses where we put people who most of them shouldn't be here. We can mainstream these people into society. We can keep them on their meds, and we don't need these facilities. And I really think the 1975 movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was responsible for a lot of that movement. And it painted a pretty nasty picture of what some of these places were like. And I'm sure some of them were. But I think that movie was not current to 1975. I think it was really 20 or 30 years behind the times in terms of what they did there. I think a lot of those practices had already been abandoned. But I've never worked in a place like that. I've never lived in a place like that, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. So we've seen those people from the 70s and 80s and 90s when those facilities were closed. We saw them pushed back out into society. We've seen fewer and fewer people who fit that category now who are sent down that path to be institutionalized. And we see this class of people massively represented by the homeless and drug-addicted encampments in so many of our major cities. Those were the people who used to live in those institutions. Right or wrong, good or bad. I think more of them need to be there. Local law enforcement officers spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with these kind of people because they function so poorly in modern society. But we have nowhere to put them. We have nowhere to put them until they commit a serious criminal activity or they truly pose a danger to themselves or someone else. And then we have a problem getting them into an institution because there are so few beds available. We also see these people making up a huge percentage of the prison populations. Prisons that are overburdened with people, sometimes double occupancy over what the facilities were designed to handle. And a lot of that is because some of these people, they need to be somewhere. They need to be out of societies in a way, but they probably don't really need to be in prison. We should reserve that for the true criminals, the true predators in our society. And a lot of these mentally ill people, they're not predators. They're just broken in one way or another. And a lot of them can function pretty well with the right kind of medications. But what I saw as a cop was they get them into counseling, they get them on meds, they feel great, they go home, they feel so great they don't think they need the meds anymore. They quit taking them, and it's just a vicious up and down cycle. And so an enormous amount of time and effort by the police is wasted on this kind of situation. And eventually these people do cause problems for society. Eventually they do need to go somewhere. And most of these people never get reported to the NICS system that is there to stop mentally ill people from being able to go buy guns at a gun dealer. That's the whole point of the system. One of the main features of it. Now, in most states, law enforcement officers can take someone into custody for usually up to 72 hours if they are deemed that they are a threat to themselves or someone else. I've been involved in a few of those. Now, those who are taken into custody are generally taken to a jail, a county or city jail. They are detained there until they are seen by a mental health professional. And in my experience, that typically happens within a few hours. So they're not held a day or two before they're seen. They're held a few hours before they're seen. The problem is whatever it was that had them so hyped up that the police felt they needed to take them into custody has died down. So they've calmed down. They're able to hold that mask up over that keeps the world from seeing just how nutty they might be. And so when the counselors see them, and you got to remember that these counselors, they don't really want to make these people out to be crazy in the first place. They see them calm down, and they invariably say, these people are fine. They're not a threat to themselves or anyone else, so turn them loose. I don't think I have ever seen one of those 72-hour holds held more than maybe 12 hours. But I can tell you, in a couple of those circumstances, I think that break, that being in custody, that being seen by a mental health professional, that having to calm down to a degree that they could hold their mask up and hide themselves from the counselor, I think in some cases that has stopped tragic events. So the system works, even though it can be very frustrating to the cops who bring them in, see them get loosed. And typically if they bring them in more than once, the courts are going to get involved, and the chances are the cops are not going to be allowed to bring them in repeatedly until they cross a line, commit a crime, and have to go somewhere by court order. Many of the active shooters that this country has fallen victim to over the last 20 or 30 years, many of them, perhaps most of them, fall into this mildly to moderately mentally ill category. But they are not being reported to NICS. Sometimes because they're not actually institutionalized, sometimes because the counselors just don't want to stigmatize them any further. There are a multitude of reasons. A lot of the school shooters, so now we're backing down in age, typically to teenagers or early 20s. Almost all of the school shooters leave clues. And nowadays, most of them make some kind of contact with law enforcement before they go active shooting. Parkland, Florida, this young man was reported not only to the local police, but to the FBI. People called in and they said, this kid's nuts. He's going to shoot up a school and kill a bunch of people someday. But the police did not push hard enough. The FBI did not apparently do much of anything to see if there were validity to these claims. So he didn't get reported to NICS. He was able to buy a gun. And we see what happened at the Parkland High School. A lot of these kids are put on SSRI antidepressant drugs. And the more we learn about those things when they are reported honestly, is that they can truly dehumanize some of these kids. Now, Dave Grossman, Colonel Grossman, retired Ranger, who he gave us the theory of sheepdogs and so much other that law enforcement embraces nowadays. He has done a lot of research, and he has proven that most of these, especially young shooters, are also avid gamers. And they're not doing race car games, they're doing shoot 'em up games where the goal is to kill as many people as possible. And he thinks that dehumanizes people. Indeed, much of our military training for everything from rifles to fighter jets nowadays is done on very sophisticated video gaming training equipment. It is an extremely effective training tool. So when you couple the kind of informal training some of these kids have put themselves through and some of these dehumanizing drugs that they have them on, it's almost guaranteeing that they're going to go too far, end up with a gun, and shoot up a school or some other place and kill a lot of people. These need to be stopped, and it is the mental health system that needs to be stopping them. But that isn't being done. Now, there's a somewhat new aspect of this mental health crisis and people being in possession of guns that has developed really in the last 20 years. As we see so many of our young men and women join the military, and more so in the after September 11th, but still to this day, they are out there fighting in the global war on terrorism. To kind of point up how prevalent these people are in our society today, I'm in a large park in my hometown. This is a town of about 15,000 people. And a guy that I remember from being the public safety director, and I'm sure he remembers me, just wandered up in this park. I'm off in a corner by myself trying to film this. He saw me, heard me, deliberately walked over, sat about 25 yards from me at a picnic table staring at me. Smoking a couple cigarettes, taking a drink. He's enjoying the park just like I am. But we've had calls on this guy before because he would go to parks and just kind of sit in the playground, stare at the kids. Now, I've never known him to be in trouble. I don't know him to be a criminal at all, but he makes people very uncomfortable. He looks like a throwback to the 70s, long-haired, pot-smoking, hippie type. So a lot of times the cops would get a call of, hey, there's some strange guy here at the kids' playground, and they think he's stranger danger. Chester the molester. So the cops would go talk to him, and I just like to enjoy watching the kids play and things, and he doesn't either understand or doesn't care how uncomfortable he makes people, and eventually he wanders off. I don't know where he lives, I don't know where he stays. Even small towns are loaded with these people. So I shut off the equipment, I sat here for 15 minutes or so, and we kind of stared at each other, and eventually he left. Okay? I was talking about the global war on terror. A lot of these people coming back have PTSD. And, after the Vietnam War, a lot of people wondered why the Vietnam vets had psychological issues when, gee, this didn't seem to happen to folks who fought in World War II or Korea. And a lot of Colonel Dave Grossman's research in his first book called On Killing, he was a psychology professor at West Point, and he did a lot of research. He went back and talked to those World War II and Korea vets, and what he found was they had problems too. But their culture, their upbringing, they just sucked it up, they internalized it, and they lived with it. And it tore a lot of them up. So I think war has always had that effect on people. We're seeing a lot of these vets now come back, and a fair percentage of them go on to become law enforcement officers or correctional officers or continue to serve their communities. And I think mixing that military combat experience with some of the stuff they see and do as law enforcement officers or correctional officers can just magnify the effect. And sometimes these heroes need more than just a simple outpatient counselor or some antidepressants or whatever kind of drugs they're giving them now. Some of them enter in-house psychiatric facilities for a period of time. Now, most of the people who come from this background, this military, police, correctional officer, paramedics to some extent are going through this as well. They're good people, and they know when they have a problem. And when it comes to being signed into an institution, they typically will sign themselves in. They don't make their family members go through the pain of having to do that. And the reason I'm doing this video now is because this is very recent. This was brought to me in the last week or two, and I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I think it needs to be talked about. When one of these veterans is signed into an institution that's supposed to be reported to NICS, that will result in a denial for them if they ever attempt to purchase a firearm from a federal firearms licensed dealer from a gun store. Now, in some states, person-to-person sales must be sent through the NICS. Anyone can access it online or I think telephonically, and you can do your own background check on someone if you're going to sell them a gun. Some states require that, some do not. Let's talk about my state of Illinois. Very repressive gun laws here, have been for a long time. Since 1968, Illinois has had a law called the Firearms Owners Identification Act. In order to possess a firearm or ammunition legally in the state of Illinois, you have to have a FOID card, Firearms Owner ID card. You have to obtain that from the Illinois State Police. There's a fee charged for it. There's a background check done. By law, that has to be issued to you, or you have to be told why you're being denied within 30 days. I have never, ever known the state police to be able to issue those within 30 days. Sometimes it's been months backlog for those to be done. Additionally, Illinois was the last state in the Union to come up with a concealed carry law forced by court order. So there's a layer above FOID now for concealed carry license holders. Another background check. There's training requirements. So that's another layer. At least when Illinois did that, they made it shall issue. So we were not like New York or California, where the system is there, but only a certain few get to really get those permits. Or in Hawaii, where I believe it's been more than 20 years since they've given anyone a permit, even though the system is there. The point is, if someone in Illinois is admitted to a psychiatric facility, their name has to be provided to the Illinois State Police. If they have a FOID card or a concealed carry license, it will be revoked. Once they leave, they generally get a letter within a day or two, and they are told that they have 48 hours to surrender their FOID card and or their concealed carry license, and to transfer all of their firearms and their ammunition to someone else who has a valid FOID and can legally take possession of those items. Now in the past, that's where the law ended, but in some changes when the gun ban went into effect and some other things here recently in Illinois, now that form requires them to not only turn over those firearms, but to itemize those firearms. So those weapons are being registered. And the person they're being transferred to is being registered as well. So when you have states like Illinois, Massachusetts, Connecticut, California who try to interfere with Second Amendment rights, it's a never-ending spiral. As an example, new little trick in Illinois. When they issue a FOID card or a concealed carry license in the last couple of years, they no longer show an expiration date on the face of the card. That means if I go to the local Farm King store to buy a couple boxes of 9mm, in the past I just had to show my FOID card. The salesperson would look at it, look at the expiration date, say, yep, still valid, here's your ammunition. Well, my card still has an expiration date, so I'm still in that category, but most of the new people, they don't have a date on their card. That means now they have to go get on the phone or get on the computer, log into the Illinois State Police check system, verify if that FOID is still valid. So in other words, you're being checked every time you so much as buy a box of ammunition. Wow, it just keeps getting worse. Now here's what brought this to a head for me in just the last couple of weeks. Last week I took possession of the guns and ammunition of someone who's very close to me and has been a part of my life for almost 60 years now. He is retired from the Navy, spent more than 20 years. He made Master Chief E9 in the Navy in less than 20 years, which is going up through the ranks like a rocket. More than 20 years of that service was as a military police officer in the Navy. He got home, he got kind of bored, so he decided to go to work for the local prison as a correctional officer. And he did that for a number of years. His wife had called me a week or so before I took possession of his guns and said he was having a lot of problems. That she was forced to take him to an emergency room in a nearby community, and they had a mental health inpatient part to the hospital. And eventually he signed himself in that day. He knew he needed some help. And he asked for me to come over and see him a day or so later, and I did, and I was shocked. He looked bad. Primary thing he wanted to talk to me about was, he said, when I get out of here, I want to give you my guns and ammo. I want you to hold them for me for a while. He said, I think I have to do that by Illinois law, but it doesn't matter. I want to do that. I don't want them around me for a while. Now, he had expressed nothing in any way that would show that he would pose a danger to himself or others. He just had had a career of seeing and doing things that left marks. After the Cole bombing in the Middle East, where a boat attacked, I believe it was a destroyer, Cole, as a military police NCO, he helped develop and train up a special unit within the Master-at-Arms community to protect ships in port. They put together special Boston whalers, very heavily armed. They were sized so that they could put 2 of these things on a C-17, and whenever a Navy ship goes into a foreign port, they fly over at least 2 of these boats and a crew of Master-at-Arms folks, and they do in tight security for those ships. They do not depend on the security of the host nation. It is my understanding that those boats and the way they were armed and utilized eventually turned into the Swick boats that the Navy SEALs use now. And if you've seen the movie Oh Dark 30, where they do that hot exfil after rescuing a CIA agent, those boats come in with 50s and 30s and miniguns and grenade launchers and whatever they need, and they lay down whatever fire they need to get those SEALs and the people they rescue to get them out to safety. So after he stood up this boat squadron, he worked in the Horn of Africa with, I'm not sure who, but he did some kind of strange stuff. And he told me that day, he said, I did some crazy things there in the War on Terror, but he said, I'll tell you what, I think being in the prison for the last 7 years screwed me up even worse. He said, some of those people are just absolutely insane. They're not humans. They're really animals. They need to be somewhere. I'm not sure they need to be in prison, but they can't be out in society. He'd just seen too much of that, and that particular day he looked pretty bad. Hadn't slept in a couple of weeks. They got him some counseling, they got him some pills to help him sleep, and within a couple of days he was like his old self. So he was released. They got him set up with a counseling program. I'm sure they're going to have him on some PTSD meds of some kind. He had not seen the VA because of this issue, but probably will be seeing them now. And for all the bad things I can tell you about the Veterans Administration from my experience in having a house loan from them after I got out of the Army and some other things, I have very little good to say about the VA, but I think they truly are the experts in PTSD, and so, I'm sure he's going to get some help. But he got that letter from the state of Illinois, Illinois State Police. You have 48 hours to surrender your cards, your credentials, and transfer your weapons. So it needed to be either notarized or witnessed by a law enforcement officer. So we gathered up his stuff. We went up to the old police department where I used to be public safety director. We had one of their officers, verify that I was going to be taking the transfer. We signed everything off, and it's perfectly legal. It bothers me to think that these vets, these heroes, should lose their gun rights. Now, as a retired officer, as a retired military police person, he has LEOSA rights, Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, same as I have as a law enforcement, retired civilian law enforcement officer, that we can carry concealed weapons in all 50 states and 6 territories. That was, enacted a number of years ago. It's been improved several times. There's another improvement act for that going through Congress now. He had that access, and I think he carried almost every day. Why? Protect himself, protect his wife, his family, and if something were to happen when he were there, he was going to protect his community, because that's what he's always done, and that's how he's wired. That's gone now. It's my read on Illinois that revocation will last 5 years, but can be appealed after 1 year. And we saw several things online where vets had appealed to the revocation system after a year and said, look, I've gone to this many counseling sessions. My counselor has written a letter of support for me to get my gun rights back. And so far, the Illinois State Police, the state, is being pretty cooperative along those lines. So it's entirely possible he's going to get those restored in a reasonable amount of time. But as I think through this, and I think it's terrible to see these heroes of our country have to suffer through this. Get off me, bug. It's a necessary part of the process. If we're going to stop active shooters from getting guns and from killing people needlessly, then we have to run this mental health side of the Second Amendment prohibitions without fail. So that means that my buddy has to go without his rights for a year, and I have to lock up his guns and ammunition and keep them until that time comes that he can have his rights restored. That's the way it needs to be. And it needs to be that way everywhere, all the time. But there are states, there are mental health systems who do not actively send those names into NICS. And because of that, we see these people fall through the cracks, and when the investigation comes up later, there were opportunities to stop them from getting guns, yet they got them, and they snapped, and they killed a lot of innocent people. To me, that's the primary way we're going to stop these active shooter events. And you know, the liberals will tell you that this is the worst country on earth, that no one else has these kind of events the way we do. Actually, according to some statistics I have seen, John Lott in particular has done a lot of research in this line. We're about 7th in the world in terms of active shooter incidents per population. We are not the worst. We are not the worst in terms of murder. We are not the worst in terms of gun suicide, although that is what the media and the liberals will tell you because they want to ban guns. And they don't want to ban guns to save lives. They want to ban guns to take over this country and change the government fundamentally. So don't ever believe that their motive is to save innocent lives. They don't care about innocent lives. Okay, communism has killed more innocent people in the world than any other of man's inventions. Now, as I said, I'm sure a lot of you will very strongly disagree with me. But I will tell you, none of the first 10 amendments are without some kind of restrictions. It's not allowed for you to go shout fire in a crowded theater. There are some limitations on your First Amendment freedom of speech rights. At the same time, while the Illinois system is perhaps one of the best at getting these people reported to NICS, at getting these people disarmed until they can show that they are capable of being armed again, they do it through this FOID system, and there is no question in my mind that since 1968, when this was enacted, it is absolutely unconstitutional. What other of the first 10 amendments do I need a state license to exercise? Do I need to go get a permit to choose the church of my choice? Do I need a permit from the state of Illinois to stand up on a soapbox in the downtown square and tell people what I think of the political situation in this country? No. But in Illinois, I have to have a license to have a gun or ammunition. There are other states that require those licenses for maybe a handgun. I don't believe there is another state with that total blanket prohibition against possessing guns or ammunition without the state license. I think Illinois is unique in that. And I'm going to make this long, but I'm going to tell you another story. The law says you have to have this card in order to possess a firearm or ammunition. There was a captain in the state police. When I went through the academy, he was a corporal. I've known him for a long time. I like the guy. Great cop. Ran a police district. Great district commander. Military veteran in Vietnam. Stayed in the National Guard, retired from there. Great guy. Except for one thing. He doesn't think citizens should be allowed to have any handguns or semi-automatic rifles. They want a shotgun to go hunting with, that's fine. But that's all. And strangely enough, at a local gun show, when I was still active in the state police, he was a district commander. He went to a gun show in his district. He showed up at a gun show. Wow, Dan, what are you doing here? I thought you weren't a gun guy. Well, I'm not, but this is in my district. I've never been to a gun show. I want to see what they're like. And he's just standing there with his mouth open. He's going, they're letting people pick guns up and look at them and examine them, but they haven't checked to make sure they have a FOID card first. And I said, why would they? Well, if they touch a gun, they have to prove that they have a FOID card. To him, touching a gun, maybe even just looking at a gun, was possession. Now, I don't think that matched the legal definition, but I'll tell you what. Within a year, every state police district in Illinois went to every gun show in their district and told them that in order for someone to pick up a gun and look at it, they had to first show a valid FOID card. So it went from possession to mere touching. Now this is ridiculous, because if you go to a gun shop, in Illinois, you can rent a gun and fire it and test it with supervision, and you don't have to have a FOID card. If someone comes to Illinois to hunt, or like the American Grand, the big trap association brings in 15,000 people down in Sparta, Illinois every year. A lot of those guys don't bring ammunition. They buy their shotgun shells there. They don't have to show a FOID card to buy that ammunition because they're not an Illinois citizen. So they actually have more rights in my state than I do. A few years ago, when ammo and reloading components, really the first time that everything went tight, wife and I were in a gun shop down around St. Louis where she used to live. We were on the Illinois side, and I'm kind of looking around the gun shop, never been in this one. Lady behind the counter says, "Sir, you looking for something in particular?" And I said, "Yes, do you have reloading components? I'm looking for a reloading powder." And she said, "No, we don't carry them here, but our sister store over on the west side of St. Louis does have reloading components. I'll be glad to call them and see if they have what you want." So she did, and they did. They had the pound of particular powder I was looking for. So we drove over to get it. Go in the store, big fancy store, indoor shooting range, the whole bit, and walked over, picked up a pound of CFE pistol, walked over to buy it, and the guy says, "I need to see your FOID card." "Why?" "Well, you're the guy that called from Illinois about this powder, right?" "Yes." "Well, then since you're from Illinois, I need to see your FOID card." "Why?" "I'm not in Illinois." "You're not part of the Illinois FOID system." And I said, besides that, reloading components have never required a FOID card. Primers, powder, bullets, we never had to show a FOID card to buy that, only loaded ammunition or firearms. He said, "Well, there was this big, tall lieutenant from the Illinois State Police that showed up over here about a month ago, and he told me that if I knew one of my customers was from Illinois, that I had to have a FOID card in order for them to touch a gun, buy ammunition, buy components, or buy anything else." And I said, "Sir, politely, that's bullshit. That law only applies within the state of Illinois." "Who was the lieutenant? Do you remember his name?" And I'm pretty sure I know who it was, because I know what district he would have come from to go over in St. Louis. "Well, no, I don't remember his name." And I said, "Guy doesn't know what he's talking about, but I was not going to get that powder until I showed him I had a valid FOID card." That's how they just spread this stuff incrementally and make it more and more restrictive. If they don't like guns, they will do everything they can to hamper you having one. But at the same time, there are people in our society who shouldn't have one. Now, the FOID system has been contested in the Illinois court system for a number of years. It has been to the Illinois Supreme Court a number of times, including one just a week or so ago. But the Illinois Supreme Court always finds a technical reason not to rule on the case and send it back to the lower courts. In this case, two guys had their FOID cards revoked for invalid reasons. They sued, and part of their suit was, and this thing is unconstitutional in the first place. Prior to the Supreme Court's ruling, the Illinois State Police hurried up and reinstated their FOID cards. So the Supreme Court said, well, you've got your cards back, so it's a moot point. We don't have to rule on whether or not they should have been revoked. And of course, they totally ignored the claim that it's unconstitutional in the first place. They just dismissed that, court case is gone. Which just proves one more time that Illinois has the best Supreme Court justices money can buy. Restrictions on the Second Amendment will never, ever be acceptable to many Second Amendment supporters. Whether it be felons, whether it be mental health, they think they should have unlimited access to machine guns, sawed-off rifles, shotguns, suppressors. Some even think hand grenades. They think open carry should be absolutely allowed everywhere. These are the kind of people who carry AR-15s into Starbucks to have a cup of coffee. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's illegal, because in many places it is legal. I'm just saying it doesn't do our cause a lot of good. The vast majority of the people in this country don't know much about Second Amendment rights. but they know they don't like to see people just walking around in public with an AR-15. Or for that matter, a holstered sidearm in many locales. I'm not opposed to it. I question why these people feel the need to do these things and to hold these really kind of extremist views. They're not doing our cause a favor. So, bang me in the comments. Tell me what a jerk I am. That's what I believe. Ours is not a perfect nation, but no other nation comes close to the degree of firearms ownership and rights that we have. We are never going to have totally unlimited Second Amendment rights. And we probably shouldn't have totally unlimited rights. The Supreme Court has gone a long ways in protecting our rights recently. I got a feeling they're going to continue that so long as we have a president who will support them, as opposed to a semi-communist takeover who will try to destroy the Supreme Court, pack it with liberal judges, and overturn everything they've done. So being willing to accept sensible restrictions, I think, is part of getting along. More importantly, in less than 4 weeks, go vote. Supposedly over 100 million gun owners and hunters in this country are not even registered to vote. If it's not too late to register in your state, get your butt down there tomorrow and register. Vote. And vote for the party who will retain your Second Amendment rights, not try to destroy them in their entirety, because that is exactly what Harris and Waltz want to do. So, if you like what I'm doing with these videos, folks, please subscribe, resubscribe, give me a thumbs up, give me your comments pro or con. Vote. Protect this country. It's the most important election I think this country's ever had. And beyond that, no matter what, be safe out there, folks. Protect yourselves and your family and your community. Thank you for watching.
Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.